Afternoon. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Kiddushin Daf Gimel. This is the blot for Shabbos, and we're starting a third of the way down on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. The Gemara starts with a story. He hits Itza. There was a woman to have a kamezavna varshachi. She was selling varshachi. Discussion in the Meforshim as to what this actually means. It likely means some kind of belt. She would sell some kind of belt. Also, Gavra, there was a guy who walked by, and Chata Varshacha Minan, he grabbed one of the belts off the rack. And Amarle, she said, Havani Ale, give it back. Why are you taking my stuff? Or give the belt back. Amarle said to her, I'll give it to you. If I do give it back to you, Mikdashesli, will you be married to me? So he took her belt and wanted to give it back to her and say, Harad Mikudashesli. So Shakla said, Ishtika. She took it back from him and didn't say anything. And Amar Rav Nachman, Yechola Lamemar in Shakli. You're right, I did take the belt back, but Vididi Shakli, I took back my own belt. And therefore, there would be no Kiddushin in such a case. But then the Gemara says, wait 1 second. Rav Nachman, we have a brisa that seems to not say that way. The brisa says, this is actually a Tosefta, if a woman were to have been proposed to with something that had been stolen, these are different versions of things that are stolen, or even if he took a sela out of her hand and then said, Harad Mekudeshes, we do have there as a case of precedence where they would be married based on that Kiddushin. So that's a kasha because the presentation of the story was that she was able to argue that it was mine. That's what Rav Nachman said. In Shakli, Vididi Shakli. So how is it that this brisa says they're Mekudeshes and the previous one says that they're not Mekudeshes? So the Gemara responds, Hasan Vidishadich. There's a difference between cases where there's context, where there's shadchanus, where there's discussions about marriage, and only then does the Kiddushin happen. That's when we would say Mekudeshes. That's the brisa, which speaks about the case of Kitcha Begezel Chamas Begniva. But in regards to the previous case where there was no shadchanus, there was no context and no conversations that were speaking about Kiddushin, therefore they would not be married. And says the Gemara, how do we know that there's a difference between Kiddushin that's done in the context of shidduchim, of conversations, versus shidduchim that are done where there's no context of getting married? So the Gemara says, as a rather lengthy answer, we're halfway down in Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, Tanya, the Brisa writes, Amar la kansi sela zeh shani chayav lichi. Take this seller that I owe you. So a man is paying back a woman for money that he took from her. And then he says to her, he's kachi libo, and I'd like to get married with you when I hand this to you. We had a previous case like this on Daf Yomi, similar but not the same. So let's see what the halachos are in this case. If it's b'shas matan ma'os, if it's as he's handing her the item, I'm hereby handing you the item, I really owe it to you, and harat mekudeshes likadas Moshe v'Yisrael. So then it depends. Ratzasa mekudeshes. If at that point she wants to be married, then she's married. Lo ratzasa ina mekudeshes, then she's not married. But let's say that after he hands it to her, now it's in her possession, and then la'achar matan ma'os, after she has the money in her hands, then he wants to marry her. So then it depends. Then things change. Afilu ratzasa ina mekudeshes. Even if she wants to be married at that point, they would not be mekudeshes. My ratzasa, my lo ratzasa. What does it mean that she wants to and doesn't want to? In this case, b'shas matan mos, where we say that b'shas matan mos, that it's up to her. If we say that when it says that she wants to marry, it's that she actually said, yes, I want to marry. And lo ratzasa amra lo, and when it says that she doesn't want to marry, that she verbalized the fact that she doesn't want to and said no, that leaves over an implication that doesn't work. Had she been silent, havu Kiddushin, that implies that would have been Kiddushin. And if that's true, then v'nisne mekudesh stam ki hasam. Then just like on the bottom of Yud Beis and Mid Beis in a similar case, we just said mekudeshes without making distinctions. If in fact she's going to be married when she's ishtika, when she's silent, then in our Mishnah over here, in our Bryce over here in Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, it's just said stam without the distinctions of b'shas matan mos, ratzasa, lo ratzasa. The halacha should be the same as yesterday's case. So then, therefore, we should have said, just said mekudeshes stam ki hasam, like we said over there. Ella, what must therefore be the case? It must therefore be the case, and we're 2/3 of the way down, that ratzasa da amra in, yes. If we say that she wanted to be married, if she says she wants to be married, then yes, she will be married. And what does lo ratzasa mean? Just that she was silent, the ishtika. And the katani, the ein mekudeshes, and we see over here that she's ein mekudeshes. When she's silent, she's not mekudeshes. And that aligns with the case that we started with today, the man who took the belt. She took back her own items. She didn't want to get married. Her silence is an indicator that she doesn't want to get married. It says the Gemara, my time, but because she can say, in Shakli, I did take that item. However, Vididi Shakli, it's mine. I ve'alachta kasha, achta kitcha begezel, v'chamas v'gnivo shchatav selam yada v'kitcha mekudeshes. You're going to ask. We tried this principle earlier with Rav Nachman, and we had said that if a person were to argue in yes shakli v'didi shakli, we said okay, but there was another case where they were mekudeshes. That was the case of gezel, chamas, and gneva. Elalav, it must therefore be shma mina hai hadish shadich hadelo shadich. That this distinction is a fair distinction, that when Kiddushin is given over in the context of marriage, in the conversations of marriage, then yes, well, it'll be much more meaningful and be more effective, and they'll be mekudeshes. Mashein kain, if it's given over in a context where there's no conversation, you walk over to a random woman, you take something out of her purse and hand it back to her and say, I read mekudeshes, and she's silent, then they would not be married. The Gemara at the first of the middle width lines, about 15 lines from the bottom of the page, goes into a little agadata, a halachic agadata of sorts after someone passed away. Kinoch nafshe de Ravasi, when one of the great Amoras of the early period of the Amoraim passed away, Ravasi, they went to the Beis Medrash to gather up together all of his memras, all of his statements. And there are three of them that we're going to analyze today. One of the rabbis piped up, Rav Yaakov Shemei, his name was Rav Yaakov, and he said, Hachi Amar Rabasi Amar Rav Mani. Rabasi just passed away. He had a statement that he said in the name of Rav Mani. And his phrase was, Kishem she'ein isha niknes b'pachos mishava pruta, just like a woman cannot be married, al pi shitas Beis Hillel, with less than a shava pruta, so therefore they won't be married. Kach in karka niknes b'pachos mishava pruta, the same halacha extends over to karka, that karka cannot be purchased for less than a shava pruta. Amrulay, wait 1 second. They said, how can you say that that's what Rav Asi said? That doesn't make any sense. We have a brayso of Tanya. Karka is niknes b'pachos mishava pruta. The brayso is directly against what you're saying. It can't be that Rav Asi said that because Rav Asi is an Amora, and this brayso precedes him significantly. So how can that be the case? Amarle, and Rabbi Yaakov, who was the one who made this comment, responded and said, "You've misunderstood." Amarle, kitanya hi bechalipin. That case was saying that the item that can be used to be niknes karka can be bechalipin. That can be pachos mishava pruta. The chalipin can be pachos mishava pruta, the handkerchief. However, what cannot be pachos mishava pruta is the actual money that changes hands. Titania, konin bikli afalpi she'en b'shava pruta. You can make a kinyan with the kli, even though it's not with a shava pruta, and that's clearly discussing the case of chalipin. That was statement number one that was mentioned in the Beis Medrash after the passing of Rav Asi to try and gather his halachos that he taught. Here's the second one. Hadr Yasvei b'ka'amrei had amr Yehuda Shmuel. They were sitting and talking, and they mentioned the shikha of Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel. Kol she'eni yodea b'tiv gitin v'kiddushin. Anyone who does not know very well the halachos of gittin and kiddushin, lo yehelo esek imahen. He should not touch them with a 10-foot pole. And here comes Rav Asi. Rav Asi, Rav Yochanan, b'kashen leolam yoser midor hamabul. That is a very sharp comparison. That those who are involved in gittin and kiddushin when they should be, they are considered to be caution. They're more difficult for the world than the mabul was, the flood that wiped out 99.9% of society. Shene'emar, because the pasuk says, "Alo v'chachesh v'ratzach v'ganov v'naov paratu v'damim nagau." Alo, there were promises made, kochash, there were promises that were conflicted. There was murder, there was theft, there was cheating, there was pritzus, v'damim nagu, and there were bloods that touched one another. So this pasuk is obviously not a very positive one. Let's see what it says. My mashma. What's the right way to understand this pasuk? The Gemara says 5 lines before the bottom of the page, Kidmatar Rav Yosef, that Molden Benin Minishei Chavrehon. People were having children with other people's spouses. Chovin al Chovin Mosifin. They were adding one Isser on top of another Isser. Uchsiv, it also says, the pasuk reads, Al kain te'eval ha'oretz ve'umlal kol yoshe ba b'chayas hasadu v'ov hashamayim v'gam dagei hayam ya'asafu. Over here, that the earth is going to be destroyed, and all of the people will be decimated, and the chayas hasadeh, the animals on the land, v'ov hashamayim, the birds, and also v'gam dagei hayam ya'asafu, they will all die, even the fish. Now, one of the things you may recall from the story of the Mabul and Parshas Noach is ve'ilu b'dor hamabul lo nigzar gzera al dagim shabayam. There was no gzera on the fish. The only people and things that died were things that were on terra firma, things that were actually on the ground. But below dagim shabayam, but this pasuk in regards to the behavior of someone who's involved in kiddushin and gittin when they're not yodea b'tiv kiddushin and gittin, then ve'iluhacha afilu dagim shabayam. Says the Gemara, maybe that's not true just in one case, and just a case of kiddushin and gittin, because we see the case of priestesses there, molden binin minishei chavero, and maybe we're not only talking about kiddushin ve'ema ada avilu kulu. Maybe the only time this happens is when they violate all of the things in the pasuk. As the pasuk spoke about all of the kichesh v'ratzach v'ganuv, all of these cases. So that's something that we might have thought. Says the Gemara, lo salkadaitach. You should not have thought that you have to do all of them, because the pasuk says kibimnei Allah of la'aretz, that even for just one of those things, just for the case of alo, that would have been enough to bring about a consequence. Okay, ve'emar Allah l'chud v'hanach l'chudehon. Maybe we should say that alo is different than all of the other ones, that the crime of the alo is different than all the other ones, and therefore maybe it's not quite as sharp as we thought. It's bad, but not as bad as we thought. That's the Gemara on the top of Yud Gimel Amud Beis, and we'll be going until about 10 lines from the bottom of the page. The Gemara says, Mi yitain partsu, doesn't say and this. Each thing was written separately. Alo, na'uf, all of them are written as individuals, and it's not and. Each one on their own is problematic. And the Gemara says, no, partsu ksi. Next comment that came up after Ravasi's passing, top line of Yud Gimel Amud Beis, under Yasvei the Ka'amri Haditnan, they were talking about a Mishnah. That a woman has to bring korbanos, who is obligated to bring a korban chatas, and she passed away. Yaviu yorshin olasa, her descendants, her children, will have to bring that korban on her behalf. Amar Yehuda Bar Shmuel. That's only true that the children, the Yorshim, would have to bring that korban on behalf of their mother, only if it was separated while they were still alive, while she was still alive. But had she not separated the animal before she died, then the Yorshim would not have to bring that korban on her behalf. It says the Gemara, what do we learn from here? Alma, kasavar shi'abud alav deoraisa. Her shibud of bringing a korban chatas, whatever the case may be, that shibud is not midoraisa as it relates to the children, because if she's not mafresh, that's the line in the sand when the Yorshim then have to take over. However, Amar Ravasi, remember we're talking about collecting members of Ravasi, so this is the third one that we're speaking about. Ravasi says in the name of Rav Yochanan, Amar Ravasi, no, even if the mother didn't separate the korbanos that we're talking about, Alma Kasavar, Shibuda Habidoraisa. He argues and says that the children do need to bring this korbanos, even if the mother was not mafresh the animal mechayim, and that shows us that the shibud, the obligation that falls on the yorshim, is a din deoraisa. As the Gemara, that's great, but we already had this machlokas previously in Shas. Says the Gemara, the Rabbi Shmuel da Amrei Tarvayu mal ve'al peh eino gova min hayorshim v'lo min halakuchos. That if somebody has a loan, but it's only verbal, there's no contract. So the halacha is you're not allowed to collect from Yorshim, and you're not allowed to collect from Lekuchos. And in contrast to Rav and Shmuel, Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish Damrei Tarvayu, Mal Ve'alpeh is Gove, Bein Mina Yorshim, Bein Mina Lekuchos. So what we see over here is that we have the same exact thing that the Yorshim seemingly do or don't have an obligation to take care of their mother's responsibilities. So we already have this machlokas. Why do we need the case that's at the top of this page? The case where Rav Yehuda Bar Shmuel says one thing and Rav Asi Rav Yochanan says another. We already learned it in the name of Badar Amor, right? We learned it in the name of Rav and Shmuel. We learned it in the name of Rav Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Says the Gemara Tzricha. We actually need to have the machlokas presented twice. Once, like the way we have it at the top of our page with Rav Yehuda Bar Shmuel and Rav Asi Rav Yochanan, and then secondly as well with Rav and Shmuel on one side and Rav Yochanan and Rish Lakish on the other. Tzricha, third of the way down. We only had it in one case, this new case. But how come because this malva was verbal and there's no psukim that speak about it. When a woman has an obligation to bring korbanos, let's say post-birth, whatever the case may be, perhaps they would agree to Rabbi Yochanan and to Reish Lakish, who say that you are govin mina yorshim, because that is a din d'oraisa. Maybe that would be the case. And the Yashmin and Vahav, we only had the case of the Isha and the Mishnah on the top of Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Perhaps that which is explicit in the Torah, the fact that a woman has an obligation to bring these korbanos to the pasuk and chumash. So then we'd say that's no different than writing in the star. So it can be governed in a yorshin. But perhaps in the latter case of Mal Ve'al Peh, in the Bodele of the Shmuel, perhaps they'd agree to Shmuel because the case of Mal Ve'al Peh is not a pasuk and chumash, and therefore tzricha, we need both cases. L'maisa, how do we paskin in this case? So it says the Gemara, Amar Papa Hilchasa Mal Ve'al Peh Govin Min HaYorshim Ve'en Govin Min HaLekuchos. Papa says the halacha is that in regards to a malva al peh, if you have a loan that's verbal, you are allowed to collect from Yorshim, but you're not allowed to collect from those who bought from the Yorshim. Govamina Yorshim Shibuda Deoraisa. The reason why we're allowed to collect from Yorshim is because it's a Shibud Deoraisa, because her obligations on her children is a din Deoraisa. They have to bring her korbanos that she was supposed to bring. And Ve'ena Govamina Lekuchos, the less lekala. But when it comes to collecting from other lekuchos, from buyers from the Yorshim, less lekala, this doesn't have a loud enough voice, and therefore you cannot collect from them. At the 2 dots halfway down, the Gemara gets into a fascinating sugya. We know, of course, that a get works, obviously, to divorce a couple. But who says that if, God forbid, Rahman al-Islam, that a husband dies, that frees up a woman? We know it's true. What are the Mari Makomos? That's what we had said in our Mishnah. A woman can reacquire herself as long as one of 2 things happen. Either she gets a get, or she has Misa Sabal, her husband dies. It says, I understand why a get works. We have a pasuk for that. The pasuk says that as long as there's a sefer krisis, she's divorced. So if a husband and the wife are trying to work on their marriage, they fail. He writes her a get, he hands her a get, they're divorced 100%, slam dunk. We got it. Pasuk and Chumash. Elamisa Sabal, what's the halachic mechanism that death frees a woman to marry somebody else? So to this, the Gemara provides 4 responses, and then we'll be stopping toward the end of this page with the 4th answer. Here's answer number 1. The Gemara says, Svarahi. It's logical. It's logical to assume that. Why? Hu asra, hu sharsa. Because he, by marrying her, forbade her from marrying other people. And then he, by dying, enables her to marry other people. So death is a svara. The fact that a woman can remarry after death is logical. Says the Gemara, that's not so simple, because there are people that who become usher to her when he marries her. So let's say like his father becomes usher to her. But if he dies, she can no longer marry his father. It's still the case. In death, things don't become any better. She's still usher to those people. So you can't use the logic of who usher, who sharsa. So the Gemara moves on to its second approach. Again, how do we know that death creates a proper severance between a husband and a wife? So says the Gemara, because the Torah says that if we have a case of a yavama, of a woman who's about to get married to another man, she only becomes a yavama when she has no children with Reuven. But if she did have children, then there's no yibum. And then we know she's mutar, she can marry anybody else. So perhaps we're able to learn from the world of yibum that when a husband dies, when Reuven died, if therefore she has no children, if she has children, and therefore she's not eligible for it to be a yavama, so then she can marry anyone. So that's a raya. Perhaps that's our source, that when a person dies, that a woman is able to remarry. Says the Gemara, no. Perhaps it's the case that when there are no children, she is forbidden for the rest of the world and permitted to a yava. But the yeshla banim, if there were children, then lekule alma nami asura. Perhaps she's not allowed to marry anybody. For that, the Gemara says, there's a reasonable argument. Even though in Maseches Yevamos we didn't seem to present such a shita, but nevertheless the Gemara embraces it, at least for the challenges of our Gemara. And 2/3 of the way down, we see our 3rd answer. What's the 3rd answer? Because we know that an almana cannot marry a kohen gadol. What do we know? That a kohen hedyot sharia, that an almana can marry a kohen hedyot. She can marry a kohen hedyot or anybody else. She doesn't have to marry a kohen, but she can marry anybody else. So therefore, we know that death works. Says the Gemara Vidilma, perhaps we should say that the kohen gadol belab. Maybe there's a lab in regards to the kohen gadol, but lekuli alma be'aseh. Perhaps there's an isra aseh for her to marry anybody else, and maybe she's still restricted even after her husband's death. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? What aseh? Hi aseh, maya vidite. What aseh are you talking about? If what you're going to say is that there's a benefit of the death of the husband, and as much as breaking them up that she cannot remarry, then she should be totally free. She's going from restricted, and because of the death, that transfers her over to unrestricted. She can marry whoever she wants. And if the death doesn't help, so then she should be right where she is. She should be stuck as an ishish for the rest of her life. But what is this like? One step down from usher to an isra aseh. It says the Gemara, alamalo, why can't we have such a precedence where we don't go from usher to mutter? Maybe we go from an isra deraisa to an isra aseh. Where do we see this? We can remove her from the punishment of Eishes Ish, which is what would have happened had she been an Eishes Ish and she slept with someone. And we should then apply the principles of the isra aseh to lower her isra. That's a wonderful change. It's not great. She still can't marry l'chadchila, that's for sure, but it would still work. As the Gemara, this is very similar to the world of Psule HaMuktashin, the animals that became puzzle. The Me'ikara in the beginning, before they became puzzle, before they became puzzle. This animal is violated Me'ila. This animal is going to be ushered to use its shearings and cannot be worked. But Parkinhu, once the animal has been free or became puzzle, whatever the case may be, Me'ila Leisbuhu, Begizav Avoda Asire. There's nothing to worry about these things. But they would still be usher. So therefore, the third answer doesn't work, and therefore we're left with our final answer as to how we know that when there is a death, that a woman is allowed to remarry. This answer is such a good answer. It's so clear and so blunt. Sometimes it begs the question why it wasn't listed first. Why is it? It's just last week's parsha, Parshas Shoftim, that we say that a man who was a rasi shavalolakacha, a man got engaged to a woman but hadn't married her, he's got to go back home. He has an obligation to be with her. What was the concern? State in Chumash. The concern was pen yamos b'milchama. Perhaps he, the new arus, will die in war. V'ishacher yikachena, and another man will marry her. V'haraya. We are able to see that a marriage can take place after death. We'll stop right here. Amir Hashem will be back in person on Sunday night, starting from right here, 8 lines from the bottom of the page at Maseches. Wishing you all a beautiful Shabbos.